Peace and blessings, family. This is the one they call Brother Asar Imhotep with the Madhu Mandela Institute for the Advancement of Science and Culture. Again, I am Asar Imhotep, part of many organizations. Many of you may know me as a member of the Amara Squad and other endeavors. But tonight is going to be a very interesting conversation. And so, as I mentioned in our last video, there has been a lot of recent talks on, more specifically, the Facebook platform regarding, especially in the Amara Squad and just individual pages, regarding the relationship, if any, between religion, spirituality, and science. And so there are individuals who believe that spirituality is science. There are others who believe that spirituality has some science, but is not in totality science. And there, of course, are others who believe that there's no science whatsoever when you're dealing with spirituality. And so some people also separate spirituality from religion. And as I mentioned in the previous conversation, I will definitely have to do a separate show on what what religion is. And so I'm here to have the conversation today and argue that essentially, when it comes to all three concepts, most of us have the wrong idea. And we're having these types of conversations, not having a firm grasp on what these individual things are. And so I hope through a series of conversations that we can bring some clarity to these concepts. So last week, I did a show which you can find on YouTube on my channel regarding why spirituality is not a science. And so, as mentioned earlier, today I'm continuing that conversation, but I'm narrowing the scope of the conversation. So we have those who say that spirituality in essence is science. But in science, as part of the methodology of science, the systematic study of nature by means of testing hypotheses and experiments with hypotheses, experimenting but testing hypotheses and making predictions. And so in that methodology, we try to be clear on the concepts that we're using. Those of you who had discussions, especially on social media, will know that if everyone is operating from a different definition of something, it's hard to have a conversation because y'all are on two different, planes of thought. And y'all first have to have a conversation on what something is and agree on that, and then base your conversation off that agreement in terms of definitions. And so the definitions that we're going to be dealing with today is primarily, again, what is science, but more specifically, what is spirituality? And so we assume we know what spirituality is, and we're having these conversations talking about what is and what isn't when we haven't grasped what that is. And so more specifically, not just spirituality in general, I want to have a conversation on what African spirituality is. And so if we're going to have a conversation on African spirituality, then we need to have a conversation of African concepts of spirit, because that's the root word of spirituality. And so the fundamental question that we are asking today is, are we translating correctly concepts from African languages into English? So when we say spirituality from an African perspective, are we in fact accurately translating it into English? And if we are not, could this be the confusion going on in these conversations about what is and what isn't African spirituality? So we're going to have to approach this from partially a linguistic perspective, especially in the semantic realm. And so that's what we're going to do here today. And so we'll probably be joined later by some of the members of the Amara Squad. You know, we're going to have a good conversation on the Amara Squad channel on tomorrow night, and the guests are going to be Dr. Taka of Kilimanjaro of Ukemet Press, and Yara Neb, also of Ukemet Press. So I don't know if Dr. Dika's wife or Dr. Taka's wife, Dr. Ife Kilimanjaro, will join them, but at least those two. And that's going to be on Saturday, October the 6th at 8 p.m. Eastern time. And so, you know, y'all stay tuned. Just search Amara Squad on the internet and find the channel, and you should be good. Take a drink. I always have some Arizona iced tea on hand. So, you know, we may continue the conversation later. So I don't want to have or waste too much time. So we're just going to get in. But I just want to say, first and foremost, thank you all who are joining live. Thank you all who are in the chat room. So I have my other computer to my side, so you may see me, you know, look that way just because I have a computer here. And just want to shout out Jehuti, Sister Monica, Academics, Revolutionary Visions, Nesubiti, Amenhotep, Peace and Black Power, Brother Chief X, peace, how you doing? Emerson Miller, peace. And I don't think I missed anybody. So, you know, there are a few watching, but only a few have chatted, have gone into the chat room and said and introduced themselves and said what's up. So I appreciate everyone joining us, you know, in the chat. And see Brother Richard Fortune has joined us. Peace to you, Brother Richard. And so anyway, so I'm going to start, and let me do a little setup here first. I gotta send our brothers and sisters in the Amara Squad the link. And so, and when y'all come in, don't come in loud. You know, I gotta tell them that because all of them crazy. And so looks like we're gonna have a good show. And normally I would have a lot of good pictures for y'all today, but I don't. So y'all just gonna have to bear with a lot of text, but I do have a lot of pictures where it's important. And so this is kind of a last minute of me putting things together. And so I'm going to have to share my screen. Again, thank you all for joining me. The discussion title today is, and I forgot to say that at the beginning, but let me get it right. Why everyone has spirituality wrong, and exercise in science and logic. So I'm arguing that everybody don't know what the hell spirituality is. but I'm gonna put it in its proper context. I just love having these titles, these crazy titles, to get y'all mad and thinking and all that good stuff. But at the end of this discourse, you'll find I'm not too far off in terms of my title. But so that's the title. So why everyone has spirituality wrong, and I have it emphasized in exercise, in science, and logic. So I'm going to have to change gears here and start sharing the screen. So hopefully enough time has passed that everyone can join. So I'm gonna pause for a few seconds and double check that the screen hold on. Okay, so everything is coming up nicely on the screen. And to Sister Monica, your question, she asks, when do you teach the research class? And it's ongoing. You can join anytime, and so it's set up for self-study. And I'm just here to answer questions and expand the conversation. So you can go to my website, www.asarimhotep.com, which you can see over here on the screen. And, there'll be a link that says classes. You can join up for my research in Africana Studies or Africology course. It's only like $25. And so thank you for your question, Sister Monica. So I assume that everyone can hear me well, and the visual seems to be up. So we can indeed get this party started in things. All right, hope you with me. So what is the first question, as I said before, is what is African spirituality? Well, before we can answer that question, we of course got to understand, well, what is spirituality? Obviously, African spirituality is simply spirituality that is born on the continent of Africa. It's not that really hard to define, but spirituality is what we need to define. So I'm going to take the general approach to what is spirituality. And so keep in mind these definitions as we go. And so according to Google, the most knowing all internet god, Google, spirituality is the quality of being concerned with the human spirit or soul as opposed to material or physical things. So let me repeat. The quality of being concerned with the human spirit or soul as opposed to material or physical things. By the end of this discourse, we will have totally redefined what spirituality is, or proposed a different way to frame what spirituality is. So, with me dealing with language and linguistics, I like to deal with the morphology of things. And so I apologize for how this is formatted, at least on this first line for this slide. But this slide, of course, is the list of important suffixes in English. So when you say the word spirituality, the root is spirit, and there are two suffixes added to the word spirit. And so the two suffixes attached to the word spirit is ual or all and iti. And so
no, hold on. Let me mute. No, hold on.
I told y'all to come in and mute you. Anyway, so I assume that's Brother Unk. I can't see, but we're going to have to, matter of fact, hold on one second, 'cause I got to make sure, even if they come in, that the screen, until we're able to have the conversation, is in fact on me. So let me keep it in. I see Brother Wujawu and Brother Unk has joined us. Matter of fact, while we're here, let me just go ahead and edit this slide real quick and put a space. Nope, not in between the E. I see it's some real time editing right now. So while I'm doing this, shout out to Brother Wujawu and Brother Unk. Y'all can say something while I get this.
All right, peace, brother. How you doing, brother Sal?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. How are you, my brother?
Hey, man, just looking forward to the discussion and your presentation, man. I think the last two were excellent. And it's just going to help us, keep moving forward, man. I think it's time to have that conversation. And man, it is what it is, man. What we're going to do.
All right. Brother Jawu, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I just want to say peace to the family, peace to USR, peace to Unc, and I'm here to take it in. Then when you do open it up for discussions, I'll chime in. But I'm already, you may call me a prophet. I'm already there. I'm already in the future right now.
Yeah.
All righty. So y'all just mute your mics and I'm gonna hurry up and try to get this done. So we can have the conversation piece. All righty. So where I stopped is on the suffixes. So the word spirit is suffixed by two suffixes. And so all, and the variant of that is all. So when you say spiritual, there's an added U there. So that's just a variant of the all suffix. And then the second suffix is ity. So the all suffix means relating to, and you find it in words such as bacterial, theatrical, natural. So when you see that suffix in English, it is that which is relating to whatever the root is. So if you say that you're spiritual, you're saying, that which is, or you are relating to spirit. So the final suffix is ity, which means a state, condition, or quality. And so you find it in such words as abnormality, civility, necessity. So we're talking about the quality or condition or state of something being necessary, for example, in necessity, or civil or abnormal. So when we're dealing with spirituality, we're at once saying, and so I'm redefining spirituality for the sake of this conversation. So we're talking about the quality of one's relationship to spirit. So let's go back. So the Google definition is the quality of being concerned with the human spirit or soul as opposed to material or physical things. I think this definition is a little bit too presumptuous, and we're going to have to refine this definition as we go. So I'm not going to go off of this definition wholly, but I want to emphasize, that's why I have this word here, opposed to material or physical things. So what they're saying here is that spirit, however it is defined, is the opposite of what is material or physical. So keep that in mind this whole conversation, right? So, but for our purposes, spirituality is simply the quality of one's relationship to spirit. So we're not going to argue just yet what spirit is, because different groups, different language speakers, different populations may have a different definition of what spirit is. So it may have nothing to do with human beings, or it may have something to do with human beings, or the soul, or not the soul. And so we want to keep it open and broad enough that it's able to encompass everyone's definition. And so what will matter in our conversations is, well, what is spirit to that particular culture, right? So we're talking about African spirituality at this point. So right now, spirituality is the quality of one's relationship. Because remember, it deals with quality, and all and ual has to deal with relating to. So it's the quality of one's relationship to spirit. So I hope everyone gets that. So the question then becomes, well, what are African concepts of spirit? And so a lot of this discussion I had in the previous conversation. So some of this is going to be repeat, but it's necessary for this conversation. So, we had a particular conversation before, but this one again is more narrowed down. So as I have discussed in many, many, many videos, spirit amongst various African people is defined as either energy, force, or power, or consciousness and thought. The dominant idea of spirit in many African languages, not all, but many, is energy, force, and power. And so these are all used many times interchangeably. And so the question then becomes, one, are they really interchangeable, these concepts? And again, is spirit in the African languages adequately defined as energy, force, or power in English? Do they equate? Is there really an English equivalent for African concepts of spirit? Right? That's fundamentally our question. And so these energy, forces, or power or consciousness, these concepts are often, personified in many African cultures. So we will continue on. So what I'm going to do now is just simply have these conversations, define spirit from various different African groups, right? And use that as a basis to go into the English and have a conversation. So again, a lot of these I read last week, but I'm gonna read them again. So now you have them on the screen. So I read them from the book directly, but now you'll be able to see the meaningful quotes on the screen. And I just typed this up just a little while ago. So if you find a misspelling, please forgive me. I tried to catch it as much as I can. So, all right. So according to Dr. Malidoma Some in his text, The Healing Wisdom of Africa, indigenous people see the physical world as a reflection of a more complex, subtler, and more lasting yet invisible entity called energy. If something in the physical world is experiencing instability, it is because its energetic correspondence has been experiencing instability. We continue on page 23. Ritual is the principal tool used to approach that unseen world in a way that will rearrange the structure of the physical world and bring about material transformation. So if you have this book, you know that he's talking about the spirit world and thus spirit itself. So you have to go to the spirit world to handle things here in the physical world, right? So if you have problems here, you should go to the world of spirit first, and then try to manipulate by via ritual the configurations in the spirit world to to their corresponding parts here in the physical world. So it's just like in the first definition that we talked about in the beginning of the conversation, where we're defining spirituality. So they argue that, you know, the spirit is in opposition to the physical and material world. So you can see that Malidoma Some is in essence saying the same thing. So he's going off of that type of definition when he's having this conversation in his 1998 book. So we'll continue. John S. Mbiti, in his African Religions and Philosophy book, 1969, he says that spirits consist of extra human beings and the spirits of men who died a long time ago. That's how he defines spirit. And so these extra human beings and spirits of men who died a long time ago. The key here is beings. So it is some kind of entity. And that's the same thing that Malidoma Some says, that it is an entity. Spirit is an entity, and that energy is an entity. And so John S. Mbiti in his African Religions and Philosophy is saying that spirits consist of extra human beings, meaning non-humans, and the spirits of men who died a long time ago. So there are some beings that exist that are considered spirit, and then there are some human beings who died, and some aspect of them now are spirits. But the fundamental thing is that they're beings, they're substances, right? Or some kind of entity. The next one comes from Richard Katz in his text called Boiling Energy, Community Healing Among the Kalahari Kung. So this whole book is about the Kung, you know, which is part of the Khoisan group in Southwest Africa, and their healing dance, and this special, you know, saying energy called Num, which we'll get into. And so it is defined on page 41. The Kung say that Kia, which is an altered state of consciousness, comes from activation of an energy that they called Num. Num was originally given to the Kung by the gods, though experiencing Kia is a necessary prerequisite to healing. It is painful and feared. The cause of Kia, therefore the activated Num, is said to boil fiercely within the person. Those who have learned to heal are said to possess Num. They are called Num Kausi, masters or owners of Num. Num resides in the pit of the stomach and the base of the spine. As healers continue their energetic dancing, becoming warm and sweating profusely, the Num in them heats up and becomes a vapor. It rises up to the spine to a point approximately at the base of the skull, at which time Kia results. So this is anybody saying that there's not Kundalini in Africa. This is Kundalini, and it has nothing to do with Indians. They don't use the word chakras. They don't divide the energy centers and chakras, but those who are familiar with Kundalini understand very well what this is. And again, this is indigenous, this is African, and this is Khoisan. Folks who ain't never been to India, and the Indians ain't never messed with them. So this is indigenous concepts of Kundalini. And the only other place that I found this is among the Igbo of Nigeria. They have a similar concept. You can read it in the book After God is the Bia by John Ume. Okay, so it's not Kundalini, it's called Num, the energy at the base of the spine. But, you know, like in India, they have to meditate to have the Kundalini energy rise to the head and release. In amongst the Khoisan, you have to dance. Dancing is what brings the Num from the base of the spine all the way and release from the head. And so it's a very good book to check out, but just wanted to add that extra piece of conversation there. Right. So in the next text, we got from Adama and Naomi Diombia or Diombia. The text is called The Way of the Elders, 2004. So page 4 of that text, it says every spirit belongs to spirit. And notice the difference in capitalization. So spirit basically is God. And so every spirit belongs to spirit God. We pray to these sacred mediators who share in the supreme power. Our spiritual well-being is dependent upon our relationship to them. Every one of us has the power to commune with these forces through prayer and sacrifice. So spirit is a force for them. And excuse me, I should be more clear. This text is basically summarizing the religious ideas of various West African groups. So we're talking about the Bambara, the Mande, the Dogon, the Dagara, those groups, and I think to the Khan and all that. So that grouping, people in Mali, Ghana, Niger, those areas. That's where their focus. So these are ideas that exist among that group. So that's what they said. So we'll continue on page 4, and they say some of our spirits lived as human beings, just like in the last text from Mbiti. Others are forces of nature. So we have here, they're forces. They respond to our petitions, though they also operate from their own agendas. The focus of our lives is how effectively to interact with the world of spirit. In other words, spirituality, the relationship one has, the quality of one's relationship that one has to spirit. So this is how you see this defined here. They are always communicating their wishes, demands, and prescriptions to us directly or through our diviners and healers. Divinities draw their power and wisdom from spirit, and we draw ours from them. And so they're talking about energy, they're talking about forces, things of that nature. And so just like Num among the Khoisan people, they have a concept called Nyama. And so Nyama is the energy that emanates from spirit and flows throughout the universe. I have these words bolded for a reason. It is the life force that links all of the existence together. Humans, animals, plants, and minerals. The power of creation and destruction. Nyama commands everything from bountiful harvests to droughts and plagues. This energy of the universe shapes nature into its many forms and yields to our handling of its power. So if you go across West Africa, Nyama is actually a word for spirit as well. And so we can actually equate these two. And so Nyama or Nyame is the word for God among the Akan. Among the Baluba, they say Nyame, but they say Nzambe. That's the same word, just a different dialectical variation. And so this is where we get the word zombie from. Zombie is just a spirit. But what they're saying here is that Nyama, is the energy. So from this root of Nyama meaning energy, we get the words for spirit across various African languages and even a word for God. So God is a spirit, which means God is energy, according to these particular traditions. So keep that in mind. And this is also Amma. This is also Amen in ancient Kemet, all from the same root here. Those of us with high levels of Nyama, such as shamans, diviners, blacksmiths, bards, and hunters, can maneuver this energy. I should have highlighted that and put it in red. Maneuver this energy and direct it at will. The ability to channel Nyama requires access to advanced levels of mystical knowledge. Those who possess this knowledge hold great influence in our communities. One may devote limitless time and effort to learn how to direct this energy, but most of us leave it to our artisans who inherit large concentrations of Nyama from their ancestors. Our artisans, remember the conversation I was having on Facebook? It says spirituality is an art. All of this will make sense by the end of this conversation. Our artisans spend their entire lives cultivating their relationship with this power. So as you can see so far, everyone believes that energy is a substance, that it can be directed and manipulated, and that it can affect the physical world. It's just an unseen substance. And so hope this is clear. So that's West Africa. Now we're going to go into Central Africa among the Pygmies. And so there's a text, Pygmy Kitabu, by Jean-Pierre Hallet and Alex Pellet. In this text, they say this fragmentary and poorly understood tradition is summarized in Shabesta's description of Elima, the vital force that parted the water. His text explains that Elima probably represents the original Swa or Batwa. That's just a variant of that name. So when you talk about the Batwa, that's who you're talking about, the so-called pygmies in Central Africa, especially in the Ituri forest. Name of the supreme being, thus of God. So this word Elima or Elima is a word for God. In the Efe language, Ilani or Ila is energy, force, power, or strength. The pygmies use this word to describe any form of energy. Ilatado, pulling energy, is the Efe name for the magnetic force embodied in lodestones. So actually the root of this word is ila, and ma or ni in these respective languages are suffixes. And so ila, energy, force, power. In my upcoming book, you will see how this word is a word for, becomes a word for God in many African languages. Especially Bantu in particular, but especially in ancient Egyptian. So we'll continue. So the next one is from Baba Ifa Karade, The Handbook of Yoruba Religious Concepts, 1994. On page 21, he says, the Yoruba contend that the study of nature is foremost. Nature is viewed as the manifestation of Olodumare's essence through degrees of material substance. That essence, translated as Ashe, Ashe, is the inherent force of all creation. The emphasis of such study of worship is not centered on the physical object or tangible, but on the life force energy that brings about its form. The tangible object is but a symbol, the external existence that bore it. So you can see him echoing much of what Malidoma Some was saying in his 1998 book. This came out before that bore it. Olodumare Olorun is in all things as the Ashe. So Olodumare God, Olorun, is Ashe, and Ashe is energy, the life force energy, is the primal essence of all things. It is not the tree, the rock, the statue, the African ancestors revere and worship, but the deep energy that brought about its being. So they're arguing that it's the energy that gave rise to the physical forms, and that the physical forms house the energy, right? So I'm showing this to say that there's consistency. So this is Yoruba land. We done dealt with the Mande, Bambara, the rest of West Africa. We done dealt with the Pygmies, and so we'll continue with the Yoruba real quick. And so this is from Robert Ferris Thompson's text from 1983, Flash of the Spirit. So the Yoruba religion, the worship of various spirits under God, presents a limitless horizon of vivid moral beings, generous yet intimidating. They are messengers and embodiments of Ashe, spiritual command. See, the word Ashe actually comes from a word meaning command, the power of command, but more so the power of a command of a king or an authority. So, you know, in traditional African systems, you know, those who had the staff of authority, Ashe is also a staff as well, the staff of the power of the person who's speaking. So that has evolved to mean power unto itself. So the power to make things happen. So when you talk about Ashe, Ashe is the power to make things happen, either by speech or by any means. So God's own enabling light rendered accessible to men and women. The supreme deity, God Almighty, is called in Yoruba Olorun, master of the skies. Olorun is neither male nor female, but a vital force. In other words, Olorun is the supreme quintessence of Ashe. So Ashe and God are the same thing. And Ashe is in the life force energy or power, as we have seen from these two sources. And so being a practitioner and just learning directly from Yoruba people and just studying others, I can agree with this. This is accurate. It is Ashe. It is power energy. That's how they define it, right? So he continues on page 74. Just as we arrive among the Western Yoruba in the presence of God to discover that he is not a he nor a she, but a pure force. So remember I said they're equating energy, force, strength, and power. So, they're used kind of interchangeably in these texts. And so the Ashe of Ashe. So God is essentially the power of powers, the supreme power, the supreme being. So the impartial laser-like precision of the punishing vision of Earth, who was here before the goddesses and before the gods, implies a power beyond her sex. So just wanted to really highlight here that God is pure force. And so they're saying Ashe of Ashe, right? So hopefully, y'all are following along and keeping up with this. So we continue, we go back actually to page 34 of the text. And so I want to acknowledge something here. So he says, there are many forms of countering uncertainty with divination in Yoruba culture, including the throwing cola nuts, which we call obi, on the ground, the casting of cowrie shells, owo, or water gazing, mirror gazing, and receiving ecstasy prophecy, and receiving ecstatic prophecy from a deity speaking through an initiated priest or priestess. So there's many forms of divination in Yoruba land. You could throw cola nuts, you can cast cowrie shells, you can water gaze, there's mirror gazing, and receiving an ecstatic prophecy from a deity speaking through an initiated priest or priestess. I also want to add in dreams. So you can go in with dreams. So over these systems, Ifa rules supreme. So the Ifa is the form of divination rules over all these other forms, which is done through Okpele. The lifetime study demanded to maintain Ifa and the respect traditional Yoruba have for the analytic reach of its verses can be indicated by a single proverb. Stargazing is no substitute for Ifa's knowledge. Now, this is very telling, because when we're talking about stargazing, we're talking about the actual physical study, for example, of the cosmos. So what they're essentially saying here, or at least this is how I interpret it. So if someone interprets it differently, I would love to hear your take on this. But saying that, basically, I'll replace the word stargazing with science. That science is no substitute for Ifa's knowledge. So remember how Ifa expresses itself in these other many forms of divination at the top. And so on the same page, actually, this was stated above the first paragraph, but I want to emphasize it last. And that is because the Yoruba regard Ifa as the voice of the divinities and the wisdom of the ancestors. This is telling because, as I said last week, that spirituality is not science, primarily because they get their information from the divinities. They don't do any experimentation like this. They do divination. If we have a problem, we'll just go to the divining tray, and then we'll ask the spirits or God. And so Ifa, the oracle, the actual divination system, is the voice of the divinities and the wisdom of the ancestors. So we'll just ask the ancestors. We won't experiment. Whatever they say is what happens. That's what it is. So for anybody talking about, at least in this aspect, that it is science, this is far from science, and we'll see why. So, if you got your information from a dream, and then, you could be right, but it still wouldn't make it science. So we just got to keep that in mind. But I want to throw that out there. I think this is the last one along these lines. So we're going to go to the the text Self-Healing Power and Therapy by Dr. Kimba Dinde Kia Bonseki Fukiao. And so moyo, according to the ancient schools of Africa, means vital power. Moyo is what is, the vitality of life. It is the key word to Kibantu, the Bantu way of life or their philosophy. Kimoyo, vitalism, is their religion, and it is not animism. So we're saying that this concept called moyo in Kikongo is vital power. And so this, you'll find this word moyo all across the Bantu world, right? So in the Chiluba language, which is a neighbor of the Kikongo speakers, cousins, the word moyo means heart, life, spirit, soul. It's synonymous with anyima. And so remember that word, nyame, they had the same word, nyama. In nyama or nyama, they don't have the A prefix, but nyama in West Africa, in amongst the Bantu, they say anyima. And so this is synonymous. So when you see that word in Chiluba, they are, when you see this word in Chiluba, it is synonymous with this word moyo that you find in Kikongo and of course in Chiluba. So it means courage, will, desire, purpose, inclination, feeling, mood, thought, and it's also used as a greeting. So in the isiZulu language, they say umoya, which is air, spirit, soul, wind, breath. So when you say the word spirit in English, it comes from a word meaning air or wind. And so we see that same word by definition is moyo in these Bantu languages. And so, but there's a context there. But what we're concerned with, not only in terms of the meaning of the word, but how is it used in amongst the group? And that is, they're using it even though it means that, at least in Kikongo, they're saying that the word is associated with a vital life force. So remember that the word moyo in Chiluba also means life. So you can see how it's expanding and it's all encompassing in terms of words. So it's the life force itself in spirit. In my new book, I'll deal with what life means among Bantu speakers. So, and of course, in Egyptian, we have the word, we say ib or yib, means heart, mind, wish, character. It has kind of the same characteristics as the word moyo. Dr. Mubabingi Bilolo argues that moyo in Chiluba and this word ib, heart, mind, wish, character, are cognates. I have done further work. I repeated him on that on one, but further work tells me that they're not cognates, that there's another word in Egyptian that is actually cognate with the word moyo, but that I'll discuss in the new book. So now I said, this is basically a two-part. So now we're in section 2. So we're dealing with what is science. So beforehand, I just wanted to give y'all, an exhaust and let y'all know that when we're talking about spirit, at least among these groups, so to be scientific, at least amongst the groups that we talked about now, the word spirit has to deal with some kind of power, force, or energy. That's how they're defining it. So at least among the Baluba, the Amazulu, the Batwa, in the pygmies in the forest, amongst the Yoruba, amongst the Akan, Mande, Bambara, and Dagara. So at least for those groups, at minimum, and it should be for those related groups around them, spirit means energy, right? So I just wanted to go through the text to demonstrate to y'all, where we're going. So if we're talking about spirituality, that means, at least from these African language groups, we're talking about the state or the quality of the relationship to energy, power, or force. So that's how we have to define it right now. So let's get into what is science. And so some of this, again, I repeated. It's going to be a repetition from last week. So please bear with me for those of y'all who were a part of that conversation last Friday. So some of this will be a repeat. And so when we talk about science, what is science? Science, according to the National Academy of Sciences Institute of Medicine, is the use of evidence to construct testable explanations and predictions of natural phenomena, as well as the knowledge generated through this process. So, one, we're dealing with nature, and we're dealing with the physics of nature, the physical things. And so we're talking about phenomena. It has to be a phenom, something physical. And so you'll hear a lot of creationists talk about, scientists being materialistic in essence, because all they focus on is material. Because in their mind, the idea of spirit is non-material. And so, at least from the African perspective, as we have read just a little while ago, they're not equating spirit with material things. They argue that energy is what it is, and that it is something, it is a substance, but somehow it is not physical. It is in opposition to the material world. Okay, so we'll see that, this is kind of confusing in a little bit, and why these types of discussions force us to be clear on what we're talking about. So another definition of science from Michael J. Baker is the measurement and study of the physical elements pertaining to the natural world. So if you were talking about spirituality, according to these African traditions, if they are arguing that it is energy and that energy is not a part of the physical world, then when you're talking about doing science, you cannot be talking about doing spirituality, because spirituality, according to them, is not the material world. And so the scientists are concerned with the physical world. So it's the measurement and the study of the physical elements pertaining to the natural world. So by definition, if we go by what it has been discussed right now, if you're talking about spirituality, it cannot be science, because science is focused on the physical world. So I hope I'm clear, saying with this. So, we got to operate from the same basis, right? So I'm going to continue. And so here's the etymology of the word science. I really don't want to get into it too much, but it comes from a Proto-Indo-European root meaning to cut or to split. And so this idea of science comes about being able to cut or separate facts from fiction. That's ultimately what it does, to make an intelligent judgment based on logic and reason, on what is false and what is true. So ultimately it means to cut, to divide, the literal rendering of the word, but it's applied to knowledge obtained by means of being able to cut away the falsehood from the truth. And so it is evolved to include this process of testing. We're only able to discern what is true or false through testing, by putting it through the ringer. So I hope this makes sense. So we're going to continue. So how does science work exactly, at least in the modern age? So now the scientific community has come together and they agree for the most part that this is it. So this actually comes from the same text that I gave the scientific definition from earlier, from the Academy of Sciences. So scientific knowledge and understanding accumulate from the interplay of observation and explanation. Scientists gather information by observing the natural world and conducting experiments. They then propose how these systems being studied behave in general, basing their explanations on the data provided through the experiments and other observations. They test their explanations by conducting additional observations and experiments under different conditions. Other scientists confirm the observations independently and carry out additional studies that may lead to more sophisticated explanations and predictions about future observations and experiments. In these ways, scientists continually arrive at more accurate and more comprehensive explanations of particular aspects of nature. We have to test. It's through testing that we know things. And so notice there's nothing here about divination, not asking any gods, not asking any ancestors. If you ask an ancestor to give you the information, it's not science. If you do divination in the process, it's not science. If you have a dream and the ancestors gave you an answer to a question, it is not science, no matter how you look at it. And so we got to keep this in mind when we're having this conversation. The Africans are telling you what is spirituality, and the scientists are telling you what is science, and people are equating the two. You can't equate the two. That's not there. They have two different ways of knowing. So, you know, there's a thing called a scientific method. There's no single scientific method because certain fields of science go through different processes, but in general, they have an observation. And, you know, they do some research and they develop a hypothesis. From that hypothesis, the hypothesis is to make a prediction. And then they test their hypothesis. And then they do more testing, adding different variables, as we discussed earlier. And so, you know, they generate new hypotheses. If the hypothesis is, you know, matches the observation, you know, then we say that the hypothesis is supported. So this is the process in general. And so the question, as I asked at the beginning of our conversation, when we say spirit in these African languages, and we equate them to energy, force, and power, is that an accurate description? Is the word energy a good one-to-one translation of the words for spirit in these African languages? That's the question. And we'll come to find out that we even have to have a different conversation regarding African spirituality when we look at the word energy from the perspective of science. So energy is simply, in science, the ability to do work. That's the definition of energy. So we should get, just from there, something different than what the Africans are saying. So remember, I told you all to pay attention to how the Africans are articulating what they think energy is. So all of the African sources that we cited essentially argues that energy is a substance. It is something that you can grasp and manipulate and do all this other kind of stuff with. But when we look at the definition of what energy is, just by definition only, it is the ability to do work. So how can the ability to do work be a substance that flows throughout the universe? Nobody thought about this critically. And so for scientists, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. Energy, mass, and the speed of light are all properties of matter. I'm gonna pause a bit so y'all can read it. Energy, mass. Remember, the energy and mass are equivalent as special relativity, where we get the E equals mc squared equation from, has demonstrated by way of experimentation as well. So energy, mass, and the speed of light are all properties of matter. Electromagnetic energy is stored in the orbital substructure of the subatomic particles and manifests as their mass. The mass of a particle is a measure of how much energy is absorbed in deformation of a particle instead of acceleration. Now, it gets kind of confusing because when you read a lot of the scientific literature, they articulate energy as something that you can be absorbed in things of this nature, as if it is physical. Like it is something that if I transfer water from one cup to another, that's how people view energy. But that's not what energy is. Energy is a property of matter. So energy is a measurement. And we measure energy in joules. And so energy is like saying height. So I am 6'1" in terms of my height. There's nowhere in the universe where you can go somewhere and grab height. Height is only a property of my physical being in relationship to my length, which is also a property. You won't go anywhere in nature and find length. It is only a human measurement calculation that we use to describe a physical property of matter. So this changes how we view spirit and spirituality. Because if spirit is energy, what am I saying here? We'll continue. And so energy and inertia, mass are equivalent. And hence the changes of energy results in the corresponding changes of mass. And so when you see E equals mc squared, that's really an equation for at rest mass. But you know, when there's rest mass or rest energy, but energy never really is at rest because the physical property is never at rest. And so, you know, you talk about the total energy, and that's, you know, everything in motion, matter in motion. And so energy is related to acceleration and speed. And we'll get into that in this. So before we continue, I want us to be clear on what a property is. So when I say that energy is a property of matter, what am I saying? I'm saying that it is an attribute or quality or characteristic of something. That's what a property is. It's an attribute. It's a quality or characteristic of something physical. A physical property is any property that is measurable, whose value describes a state of a physical system. The changes in the physical properties of a system can be used to describe its changes between momentary states. Physical properties are often referred to as observables. They are not modal properties or manner in terms of way or manner, modal properties. So again, a property has to be attached to something physical. So if energy is a property of matter, but spirituality claims that spirit is energy, but it is separate and it has nothing to do with the material, it is not the material physical world, then there's a contradiction here that we have to analyze. And so there's some key properties when we're talking about matter and its physical properties. So these are some key terms that you should write down and commit to memory. There is intensive property, extensive property, physical property, and chemical property. So intensive property is any characteristic of matter, is that word matter again, that does not depend on the amount of substance present. Extensive property, any characteristic of matter that depends on the amount of matter being measured. Physical property, as we discussed just previously, any characteristic that can be determined without changing the substance's chemical identity. So some like a physical property we can describe, and we'll see this a little later, it can change its state. So we're talking about a physical property, but if you're talking about a chemical property, any characteristic that can be determined only by changing a substance's molecular structure. So once the molecules change and it becomes a different structure, then we're talking about chemical properties. So let's go a little bit deeper here. All properties of matter are either extensive or intensive, and either physical or chemical. Extensive properties such as mass and volume depend on the amount of matter that is being measured. So if energy equals mass times the speed of light, and that there's an equivalence between mass and energy, mass is an extensive property, which means energy is an extensive property. And how much energy is in terms that we're measuring depends on how much of the mass is being measured. There's a relationship there. So intensive properties such as density and color do not depend on the amount of matter. So I can have an orange, right? And I can have a baby orange or a big GMO orange that Monsanto then injected with some pesticides and it mutated into the size of a basketball. As long as the color is orange, it wouldn't matter what size or how much mass is in the actual orange. The orange will still be orange. So it doesn't, that's an intensive property. It doesn't matter how much mass is or how much the amount of something is. That property does not change. So both extensive and intensive properties are physical properties, which means they can be measured without changing the substance's chemical identity. For example, the freezing point of a substance is a physical property. When water freezes, it's still H2O. It's just in a different physical state. So I know I'm saying a lot here, but I'm hoping that y'all are following along and that I'm being clear, in what I'm saying, and that y'all are getting everything that I'm saying here. So we define what property is, which is a characteristic or quality of matter. And so now we have to define what matter is. And so matter is a physical substance in general, as distinct from mind and spirit. And so they're going off the definition that spirit is non-physical, that it is a substance that isn't physical. I don't know how that can be the case, but it's, spirit and mind. In physics, that which occupies space and possesses rest mass, especially as distinct from energy. And so when the Africans are saying that energy can be manipulated, it can be directed and harnessed, that would mean only that energy has to have a physical property. It has to exist within time and space. And so energy, according to them, would technically, by definition, have to be matter. But you can see when we try to read and reconcile these things, there's confusion here. So this is why we're trying to clear all of this stuff up. And so remember, we were talking about the different states of matter. So matter has 4 primary states: solid, liquid, gas, and plasma. So I don't know if water can turn into plasma, but at least water has, H2O, the substance H2O can exist in 3 different states: as gas, liquid, and solid. So solid when it's frozen, liquid in the form that we know as water, and gas. So hold on. I'm going to continue. And why is that showing up on my screen? Okay, so hold on. I'll turn these dang notifications off. That's what I got to do. Okay. So, you know, physical properties of matter, as we discussed before. So color is a property. Smell is a property. Hardness is a property. Luster is a property. Phases of matter are properties, solid, liquid, and gas. Again, I want to re-emphasize that you cannot harness energy. Energy doesn't exist. It's not something, it's not a substance, because it is a property. It's just like you can't go anywhere and find color in nature. Color is a word that we use to describe, you know, the way that light reflects off of an object. Hardness, how hard something is. You can't go anywhere and find hardness. Hardness doesn't exist as a substance. We use it to describe the quality of an object, its matter. So when we talk about energy, we're talking about the same thing. So from this slide, we know, again, as I have re-emphasized, energy is not a substance. You can't harness it. You can't put it in your bag. You can't manipulate it. You can't go to the spirit world and manipulate energy to manipulate the material world. It's impossible for you to do that because energy is not a substance. It cannot be weighed. You cannot weigh energy. It does not take up any space. Energy describes a condition. I will continue. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed. So when we talk about energy can only be transformed, we're actually talking about matter. There's also a, you know, everybody knows the energy, what's the word I'm looking for? Conservation, the conservation of energy. The conservation of energy is really the conservation of matter. There's a conservation of matter. Matter cannot be created nor destroyed. It can only change form. And since energy is a property of matter, that's why you have that same logic when it comes to energy. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It can only change form. So as matter changes form, so does energy, the description of the matter, the calculation of the matter. And so remember that energy is the ability to do work. And so let's get into this. And so there's only two forms of energy technically. There's kinetic energy and potential energy. All the other types of energy like chemical energy, sound energy, they're really just extra ways of saying kinetic or potential energy. Those are the basics. So if you look at this diagram, or excuse me, this cartoon, so to speak, you can see exactly what we're talking about. So kinetic energy has to deal with motion, acceleration. So when an object is moving, it has kinetic energy. It's the object in motion. But potential energy has to deal with the position in reference to a zero energy plane. So we see like this woman sitting here on this swing, right? In relation, she's not in motion in this part of the cartoon. So she has no kinetic energy, but she has potential energy. She has the potential to do something because of her position. Now, think about it like this. If this could, the potential work that we're talking about here, the potential work that I'm talking about here is the ability to swing. So swing is the work, right? So if this swing was actually on the ground, it would have zero ability to do work. It can't swing. But because the swing is elevated, in relationship to the ground, it has potential to do work. As soon as a force is added to the swing, then that potential energy converts into kinetic energy. And so you have to understand it from this. It's not a physical conversion. We're just talking about the different states of the matter. So from this woman being still, she has potential energy stored here, but as soon as she moves, she has kinetic energy. So the potential is now kinetic. And so she moves up, and as soon as she reaches the peak of her ascent, now she has more potential energy than she did when she was stationary at the bottom, because she's higher up. And so we can look at it from a car on a hill. So when a car is driving up the hill, there's kinetic energy in the process. It has potential energy at the top of the hill. So when we're talking about potential energy, we're talking about in relationship to the earth. And so when it comes down, it has more kinetic energy because of the pull of gravity. So I hope this is making sense to everyone. And so potential energy of an object is due to its position. Remember, I was talking about earlier, the position it is in determines how much potential to do work. Internal structure or chemical composition. Energy that is quote unquote stored, they had to quote it because energy is not a substance. And so we're using the concept stored, as kind of a metaphor. So energy that is stored until it can be converted into some form of kinetic energy. Types of potential energy, gravitational energy. So that's what you see right here. This is gravitational energy. So the higher up you are, the more energy, the more potential energy you have. So this is why a comet coming from outer space is so destructive. Because if you have such a large object coming from outer space and the pull of gravity forces it to the ground, the kinds of explosions that will happen is due to how high, the meteor has fallen. And so you have chemical potential energy, nuclear potential energy, elastic potential energy, and electric energy, potential energy. And I see your comment, Brother Chief X. Unfortunately, we don't have artists that, Black scientists who could create Black artwork so we can have these discussions. So he's talking about the white woman. He said, I don't like white. I'm racist. The lecture's on point, but I'm racist because I'm using white people. So that's just Chief X being funny in the chat. So I see you, Brother Chief X. So I need some of you Black scientist artists to start redrawing a lot of these scientific concepts using Black people. So that's the challenge. So anyway, so here's just another exhibition of potential, kinetic, and then the third one is mechanical energy. And so potential energy, you see the hammer, the guy holding the hammer at the top, right? Because of his position, how much work he can do depends on how high up he is. So as soon as he puts that hammer, and I know you was joking, Brother Chief X, as soon as he puts that hammer into motion, then it becomes potential in it, becomes kinetic energy. We're describing the matter in motion. So matter in motion, how we calculate that is in terms of energy, in terms of kinetic energy. And then mechanical energy, when potential energy and kinetic energy come together in this sense. So the work is actually being done or is done. And so you can see the same thing when you, if any of y'all ever crossbowed. So as soon as I stretch the bow back all the way, like you see with this gentleman here, another white guy for Chief X, it's in how much the potential for it to fly and do work and how far it goes, depends on how far back, in relation, saying to the center of its gravity here. And so once you release it, it's kinetic energy. So, I'm just re-emphasizing this because I want to make this clear, that energy is not a substance. There's nothing you can manipulate. You can only manipulate matter. And so, that's why I asked that question at the beginning. So the African spiritualists and scholars are translating spirit into energy, force, and power. But in physics, these are separate concepts. So we know what energy is. It's the ability to do work. Force is another non-physical thing. And so in physics, a force is any interaction that, when unopposed, will change the motion of an object. A force can cause an object with mass to change its velocity, which includes to begin moving. Excuse me, let me slow down and do this correctly. In physics, a force is any interaction that, when unopposed, will change the motion of an object. A force can cause an object with mass to change its velocity, which includes its ability basically to begin moving from a state of rest, therefore to accelerate. So a force is that which causes acceleration or the change in direction for an object already in acceleration, going into a straight line. But there's a reason why, like if we shoot a dart in the air, it doesn't just go in a straight line because of gravity and the curvature of gravity. But that's another topic for another day. So force has to deal with a particular type of interaction with an object. And so there's a formula for this. So force equals mass times acceleration of an object. And so, here's another more elaborate formula that you see. And so when you see an arrow over a symbol in physics, it's a vector, meaning it has a direction. And so this force, this vector force, equals mass times acceleration. And so for those who don't know, acceleration is the change in velocity, and velocity has a direction, so it's a vector, over the change in time. So that's what that D means, change. So change in velocity over or divided by the change in time equals the acceleration. So mass times acceleration equals the force. Okay. So power, remember they said power, it also equals spirit. But, power isn't something, it's just a measurement. So power equals the work over time. And so force times displacement over time. So work equals force times the displacement. So, over the time. And so power equals force times displacement over time. And so power equals the force of an object times its velocity. And so these are calculations, ways to describe and calculate and measure the movement of matter. So concluding our analysis, if spirit equals energy and energy is a property of matter, then spirituality can only be concerned with material things and its conditions. So when people start talking about spirituality, it doesn't have to do with the physical. That's a bunch of BS. If we're doing an accurate translation, energy is the calculation. It describes the property of matter. So when you're talking about manipulating energy like Malidoma Some and the Diaspora couple and everybody else, you're only talking about matter, physical things, physics. So spirituality has to do with the changing or the rearranging of physical matter. That's why it's an art. So I hope I'm being clear here. So that's why, for those of you who have been following, on my Facebook page. Hold on while I take a sip of this Arizona tea with my country self. Excuse me. Okay, so y'all, for those of y'all on my Facebook page, y'all know that I said that James Smalls, Professor James Smalls, is the only one who got spirituality correct. And so if any of y'all have ever heard Professor Smalls speak, you'll often hear him say this phrase, that spirituality is reality. If you're not dealing with what is real and physical, it is not spirituality. I don't care what anybody says. Spirituality is reality. Therefore, food, clothing, and shelter. And I add family and its protection. The development, the maintaining, the protection of food, clothing, and shelter is spirituality. Anybody talking something different is out of order. It's not some mystical, magical thing. How are you manipulating the matter around you to meet your needs? Spirituality is reality, your reality. So what's interesting is this term I jumped to the collagen language, and I'm gonna get to your question, Lissa. It's the word, and make sure y'all mute your mics. It's the word ayik. It's also pronounced oyik. And it's a word for ancestors, departed souls, or spirit in general. So when you look at the root ai or oi, is art, craft, or to create. How's the word for spirit and ancestors, at least in the collagen language, the root meaning art, craft, and create? So their word for spirit derives from the word art, craft, and create. Remember I said spirituality is art. And so we have different forms of this word. Oyik, ik is a word that is plural. I mean, ik is a plural suffix. So the root is ie, and so the y's have merged. So it's two words actually together. Ie and ye, or a and ye, meaning to create and to bear. And so when it comes to ancestors, it's those who created or bore you. But the word for spirit itself is the word for to create. And ayin tet, an ancestor, departed soul, spirit. And ayin natit, ancestral spirit. And so remember that word artisan. Remember when we read in, let me pull out the book real quick. And I know I have a bunch of them somewhere. Where the hell did I put it? And that is, I don't want to go all the way back up there. This is from The Way of the Elders, Adama Niami Giombia, in their work. And so, what did they say? He said, those of us with high levels of Inyama, remember Inyama is an energy, and it's a word for spirit in other African languages, such as shamans, diviners, blacksmiths, bards, and hunters, can maneuver this energy and direct it at will. The ability to channel Inyama requires access to advanced levels of mystical knowledge. Those who possess this knowledge hold great influence in our communities. One may devote limitless time and effort to learn how to direct this energy, but most of us leave it to our artisans. So our artisans are the one who's doing spirituality. Artisans who inherit large concentrations of Inyama. I gotta turn these things off. Okay. Many of our artisans I gotta go back up. One may devote limitless time and effort to learn how to direct this energy, but most of us leave it to our artisans who inherit large concentrations of Inyama. from their ancestors. And so basically those who harvest inyama are shamans, diviners, blacksmiths, bards, and hunters, and other artisans, those who deal with the arts. It's artistry. And so again, it forces us to have a different conversation on what is spirituality. So now we have to have a redefinition of spirituality. So remember earlier, the first redefinition of spirituality is the quality of one's relationship to spirit. So we define spirit as energy, and energy is the ability to do work, and which is a property of matter. So when you're talking about spirit, you're talking about matter, the physical world. So therefore, when we talk about spirituality, we're talking about the quality of one's relationship to the creation and protection of food, clothing, shelter, and family. That's it. And so I'm going to do another conversation on this concept called the lower hunger and the greater hunger. So spirituality, while people think it is some high mystical thing, actually deals with the lower hunger, that which can be substantiated or satiated, by material things on earth. And so we'll get into a deeper conversation of that. But I think this may be the last slide. I think there may be one more after this. And so reminds me of the group FTP. So, shout out to, the RBG movements that's associated with FTP. And so they came out with an album, that the FTP movement presents Food, Clothes, and Shelter, the street album. And so, I just wanted to shout out that record. It's a pretty dope album. So, again, art, which is a skill as a result of a learning or practice, from Old French and Latin artum, which is a work of art, practical skill, a business craft. It's a manner or mode, suffix by the root R, to fit together. You can only fit together material things. So everyone, who is involved with spirituality, in essence, you have to be an artist. And so you can get your inspiration from divination, your imagination, and all this. It would not be science. Now, I think that is, in fact, and yes, it is, the last slide. So I appreciate everyone for, let me end this, stop the screen share, and we are back to my visuals. And so I hope I was clear. I hope I made a very good case. And so I appreciate everyone for listening. We're not done yet. We're just going to, continue the conversation. But, if you're not, subscribe to my channel, please subscribe. We have conversations like this all the time. I interview a lot of good scholars, and we could keep this conversation going. Make sure you leave a comment in the comment section, like the video, share the video, continue the conversation. And so, the conversations that we're having here is, much needed, so we can get clarity, so we can stop misusing these concepts, when we're out teaching or when we're organizing stuff for our family. So if spirituality, the true spiritual person, is one who deals with material things, talking about food, clothing, shelter, and the protection of one's and sustaining of one's family. That's spirituality. And so if that's not what the Africans mean when they say energy, then we have to find another word to translate into English for what spirit is for them. And so this is why we're getting clear. So if everything stands, if everything is true from those sources which we cited earlier in the discussion, then energy, then spirit equals energy, and energy is not a substance. That is a misunderstanding from people who don't know science. Energy is not a substance. It's nothing. It can't be weighed. It cannot be contained. It is a property, a description, a calculation of matter as it regards its acceleration and or its rest, its position, and in terms of chemical energy, its chemical composition. And so I hope I was clear. Please review this when you can. So now I open the floor to our brothers, Brother Unk and Brother Wujawu of the Amara Squad. And, if y'all have any commentary to add, please, chime in now.
I want to say something. I'll be short.
Oh, boy, I hope so. Shit.
All right. So I'll be short because when I first spoke tonight, I mentioned that I'm already in the future. So I just want to clarify or explain what I mean by that. And so over 2 years ago, I had did a post even on the website, seshmedunature.com and Facebook, all over Facebook, like years ago. And this is what I said. And I took this inspiration from, and I'll say where I took it from after I read it. I said, spirituality is a subject that must be approached with the same intellectual precision and rigor that is offered to the hard sciences, such as mathematics, chemistry, etc. Now, technically, I know mathematics is not a science, but hopefully people get the point. One cannot master mathematics if the terms such as factoring, products, common denominators, etc., and so on, were not precisely defined to mean one and just one thing to all mathematicians. Oxygen, hydrogen, and all other such terms are, all other such items are atoms and not compounds, even though they are compounds composed of electrons, protons, etc. Every atom differs from others not in the type of components, but in the quantities of their components. That is, each atom of a kind being made up of the same quantitative identity. Such precision is what enables scientists to think objectively and achieve an exact aim at results. The common idea that religious and scientific thinking are opposite to each other is not true. The unscientific thinking that governs most religions and spiritual systems, quotes, is due simply to the lack of understanding of spirituality among the creators of the systems. We cannot think correctly, let alone effectively communicate our ideas about spiritual matters, if the elements of spirituality, that is mind, the word spirit, the word consciousness, the word self, the word soul, and so on, mean different things to different people, and worse, if their definitions are not in sync with the reality they are intended to represent. Okay, so I say that to say that what you did, Asar, tonight was exactly what I said that I just quoted. You slowed everything way down to 2 miles an hour and defined all the key terms so that everybody can synchronize on a basis to have the conversation and be clear on what's defined. And that is the first step in any endeavor. I know as a fellow computer programmer, one of the first things you do in a program language or whatever, you declare your variables. And once you declare your variables, then you could proceed to manipulate them, etc. Same thing in contracts, mortgages. People take mortgages, car loans. They define their terms in the first section of the document or somewhere in the document, and then it actually sets the scope for how those words are used. And so this is a part of the conversation that's been missed for so long. So I think that you doing this is, and you said this on Facebook, the conversation begins here. And so I think that what you did is very, very important and something that is long, long, long overdue. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Hey, Wuja.
Yep.
What I always say spirituality is.
Oh, you said your version of spirituality is food, clothing, and shelter.
And protection of that, right?
Yeah, that's Professor Small.
So I got that from Professor James Smalls about 10 years ago. That's the only thing that ever made any sense to me. And I stood fast on that. I appreciate you, Brother Saul, a whole lot. And so if you're not correcting your reality, if you're not putting in work for your community, you just running around having fun. And it's very interesting how you put all that together. And I had a feeling you was going to really put it together. You have this ability to really demystify a lot of African concepts, which allows us to see that the African from day one has always been on par. That is a level that we have fell from, based off of customs and traditions getting lost, based off of lack of writing systems, based off of the underdevelopment of Africa, right? It's like anything. You have a lot of superstitions at times, and you don't know where they came from. Like, if you say something, you'll make a statement like, well, knock on wood. Where did that come from? At some point in time, somebody must have thought that you could knock on wood and it would change your reality. Some way, some form. Well, we understand that when you believe in things you don't understand, superstition is on the way. So we're all running around with superstitions based off of our level of understanding. And it makes sense. We've been pulled away from Africa. Nobody sat down and explained our ideas. We've been going through this for generation and generation. That's why I appreciate you. And I appreciate Brother Wuja, because I can have conversations with you and it makes sense. You know, I don't play the fly through the air game. As soon as I see them feet leave the ground, I'm like, nope, I can't do it. Because it needs to be in reality. And y'all two brothers do an excellent job. It's just that, you know what I'm saying, you gotta slow it all the way down and really explain what you're saying, right? And so I think all of us need to do that, right? But I refuse to think that spirituality was anything other than that. And because, I got 5 children, and I already know what it is at the end of the day. Like, man, come on with that. And so with the working knowledge coming from you, Brother Saw and Brother Wuja, Amaral Squad, Mocha University, all the families, I think the African is ready to take that next step. And I'm really looking forward to the show tomorrow. And, it's been a hell of a conversation, and I just hope we can heal from it. So we'll be taking those ideas presented today, Brother Saw. We'll be taking your ideas presented, Brother Wuja, and we'll be pushing the damn community forward.
I appreciate it. And I just want to explain, because somebody asked the question, Strife77, it said, Asar, so if you got lots of food, more clothes, and a big yard, you're more spiritual? Wouldn't that be considered as materialistic? Yes and no. By definition, remember, I'm going by the definition of what these particular African groups called spirit. So when you're talking about spirituality, you're talking about the quality of the relationship with spirit. That's the definition of spirituality. So if spirit is energy, and energy is technically a calculation of matter, how much matter or the quality of your relationship to that matter determines how spiritual you are, in essence. And so, but what people are confusing spirituality with morality and ethics. Morality and ethics are totally separate from spirituality and anything else. Even science. Science has nothing to do with morality and ethics. Fact. That deals with that's philosophy that that argues the merits of people's morality and ethics. And so, are you more moral? Are you more of a human being per se, based on how much you accumulate in terms of matter and things? That's up for debate. That's why we have religions. People talk about religion as if it is a bad thing. Religion is what keeps your community together. because religion has to deal with how do you treat other human beings? What is the protocol if I was to go to, for example, Unc's house and I was to steal his television out of his living room, if he has a television in the living room. So what's the protocol to make that right? Because what happens if I steal his television? One, he could retaliate and just be mad and kill me, you know. If not that, if he doesn't go that extreme, at minimum, our relationship has been severed. Because I have disrupted the quality of our relationship. Now he doesn't trust me around his things or around his family. So if I have a relationship with his family too, now I have severed ties with that. So how do you rebind those relationships? That's what religion means. The protocols that is set in place by the culture is one's religion. And so people want to walk around, Africans didn't have no religion. BS. Africans have religions all day. Anybody who has a set of rules for dealing with, a set of rules and expectations for people who live within a community to deal with each other has a religion. It has nothing to do with your relationship with God. That's spirituality. Because for them, God is energy. So your relationship to the physical world, existence itself, you know, is spirituality. But religion has to deal with my relationship with people, human beings. And so, you know, am I so we have to reevaluate in light of this new information, rewrite and reword that question. You know, so the question within the basis of my community, is it ethical for me to hoard all that food, clothing, and shelter?
Facts.
That's what Africans were dealing with when we were talking about equality, Mat, Ubuntu, sharing what we have. And so I have a whole, my new book, this is chapter 1 of my new book, A Linguistic Assessment of Ma'at and Its Usage in Modern African Communities of Memory. This is the printed out, this is the chapter.
Read it again. What's it again?
It's a linguistic assessment of Ma'at and its usage in modern African communities of memory. The word Ma'at ultimately comes from a word meaning to give, to share. Poetically, we say open-hearted sharing. When you understand open-hearted sharing, you understand Ma'at. You understand Ubuntu. You understand why you see pictures of people presenting Ma'at to the deities and offerings, because they're sharing. That's what it is, open-hearted sharing. And so if I have accumulated food, clothing, and shelter, is it in my neighbor's time of need, do I share my material things with them so that they can be equal, or how should I say, they can elevate themselves, you know, say back to a state of equilibrium. It's about vitality, the fluctuations in life. So if I have abundance, you know, for the people who I love in my community and stuff, you have. It doesn't mean you can just come and take it. It just means that, you know, if I see you struggling, I share what I have with you. This is the essence of what we're talking about. And so when we properly define these things, you'll see that everything fits in order. Everything fits nicely. So if you understand your relationship to the material world, you can harness it in a way that, you know, in case your basic needs are shared. But of course, human beings are social beings, and so we live in communities. And so if everyone is operating within the same sphere to ensure food, clothing, and sheltering for themselves, leaning on each other in the process, that's where religion comes in, because we understand that human beings have conflict with each other. How do we resolve conflict? What are the moral expectations for us coming into this community and using our skills to make sure that we have all of our basic needs met? Science comes in as to better study the reality. Just because you can find food, like if I just go pick food off the tree, that's not science, because I'm not asking scientific questions. Just because I can manipulate some colors on a canvas doesn't mean that that's science. And so we gotta be clear on these things. Once we're clear on these things, we can design plans to move forward. So we're not confused with all these new age folks who don't like to study. But I hope I wasn't rambling too much. I don't want to go too far. Anybody have any last words? I don't want to make this too long, so it's going on 2 hours now.
Okay, I just wanted to say, I said what I said at first and wanted to follow up with that. And I want to underscore what you said in your Facebook post, that the conversation begins here. And so I know you don't want it to be long. So I'm just going to just say that what you gave tonight also starts the conversation from here and move it forward. And so like two questions that it raises, or at the very least two questions, is that if spirit is energy and therefore God is energy, and energy is a property of matter, then is there any such thing as outside of matter? If there's nothing supernatural outside of nature, then is there something that's outside of matter? You see what I'm saying? So those will be the questions that we would have to discuss if there's things outside of matter, because if everything is matter and energy just describes a property of matter, then everything is material. I'm just going to the conclusion part. Everything is material. Therefore, everything is spiritual, because everybody has a relationship to the material, because you can't be outside of the material, because everything is matter, because energy is a property of matter and God is energy. You see, so it starts this train of reasoning that starts the conversation. And I think that it will unfold into something that blossoms very nicely if we continue this. So I just want to kind of put that out there. And I liked what you said lastly tonight about the lower hunger, because food, clothing, and shelter is basic necessities. But we know that ethnic groups on the continent of Africa, they did things that was beyond the basics. And like you said, bringing science into the situation allows the study of and the discernment of. And so, so the continuation of the conversation, I think definitely, like you said, begins here, and it'd be good if we can continue it.
Yeah, we had like a 3-hour conversation on that, didn't we, Wu Jia? We're not going to do that here, but I remember looking and studying Dr. Ben and them, and it's little things that Dr. Ben would say. He would say, well, the Greeks was always fighting the Persians. They was always engulfed in wars. And so it was in those times of wars that they just did not have time to settle down and really start making these grand ideas, these philosophical thoughts. And so if your stomach is not full, right, then you'll never be able to raise from a village setting to a great civilization. So it's important. The vital needs must be secure, right? You must have science to continue that. Meaning you gotta be able to just go from just picking stuff, learn how to grow stuff. You can feed more people, have more family. You know what I'm saying? And so it's levels to this. But if your basic needs are not met, right, then it's impossible to do what you need to do. So right now we fighting a fight Well, basic needs aren't met. Because if it was, Asar wouldn't have any books. All your books would be gone, Uja. All my shoes would be gone. We out there struggling. You know what I'm saying? It hurt to get a pair of shoes. It hurt to get a book. It do, because you be fighting. And so as a community, our basic needs aren't met. The Jewish community, I was raised in one, they had everything they need. Their basic needs was met. And this is our problem. We need to learn how to get back in touch, right, with reality. You know what I'm saying? So we can do that. And I'm going to end with that.
All right. Well, I appreciate our brothers Wujawu and Brother Ankh. This discussion will continue in 2 parts on Amaral Squad YouTube page. And that discussion is going to, and it's going to be a little bit broader in terms of the first discussion, because we have guests, Dr. Taka Kilimanjaro and Brother Yara Aneb with the UKIMIT Press. And they have some good upcoming books, and they have a variety of books that are just what the community needs. And so just a quick shout out real quick to give you an idea of what we're working with. Like, I have some other book somewhere. I have another research book, but you know, Africa Time, Universe to 1896 AD. Ife, Taka, and Yara Aneb co-wrote this together. Bach, the U.S. Birth, Development, Decline, Regression Before the Leap and Passing, 1607 to the present. They're a husband and wife team, by the way, Dr. Taka and Ife Kilimanjaro. This is Bach 2. Survival Organization. Build African Institutions of a New Type. So this is Dr. Dika, Yara Aneb, Tagamba Heru, and Guyan Ankh Ma'at. So they're a collective who write these texts. Study teams. Build research, publish, and teaching teams. And then SIBA, a researcher's, what is this? A researcher's first handbook, how to conduct research. And so we're developing the text and developing the institutions where we can meet those needs. And so the first book that they have in their series is Ma'at. So they're dealing with Ma'at, dealing with the religious aspect, even though everybody claim not to be religious. But when you're talking about religion, you're talking about your relationship between people. And so you have to have some moral guiding principles to do that. That's your value system. So they started off the series before we can get to any of this, dealing with the morality in Ma'at. And, they have a total of like 16 books out. I don't have all 16. And so they're coming out with 2 more. So that'll be 18. I'm pretty sure Unc got some other books around him he can show you.
I have a screen. If
okay.
Quick title.
Yeah, there you go. The whole shebang.
So yeah, I'm gonna put it on your screen. And so, these are the books from the UKIMIT Press, the University of Kemet. So it is, I plan to get every last one of them. And, even African K-12 schools, how to create that, what must be done, teaching teams. So now we have study and research teams. Now we have to have teaching teams, because if you're going to build academies, you have to create the books, for the people to learn. So you have to go through a research process, and you have to go through a teaching and publishing process. And so they're dealing with all of that. What else is up there? The Ma'at book that I mentioned earlier, Restoring History. And what is this? Per Ankh, African House of Life, Community Building. All of this stuff is here. We have the material we need. And some of these come with workbooks. Well, they don't come with them. You got to purchase them. But some of them have workbook versions. Like that research book is a workbook, basically, on the far right hand side of the screen. But anyway, I just wanted to say thank you again to everyone, and keep the conversation going. And I will see you all online, or maybe in person. Hopefully some of y'all be at the DIOP conference in Philly on next weekend. Anyway, that's why I'll see y'all. Love y'all. Good night. Peace.